Commander Teo stood in the middle of the equipment bay of the orbital station Helix 7, looking at all the strange beings who had come to learn survival skills. His 3 eyes scanned the room carefully, checking every single detail. He was a Valorian, a tall alien with blue skin and long, thin fingers. Everything about him showed that he took his job very seriously. His antennae moved back and forth on his head as he thought about the coming lesson. He had been teaching survival skills for 20 years, and in all that time, he had never lost a student. This record was something he was very proud of. The recruit training room was full of different kinds of alien creatures. There were Canorians, beings made of crystal that glowed with soft light. They looked beautiful, but also very delicate, like glass figures that could break if dropped. There were Ignivarks, too, red-skinned beings who came from hot planets where fire rained from the sky. They had thick, dark hair all over their bodies and looked uncomfortable in the cold room. And then there were the Stoneborn, huge creatures made of rock and stone who looked like moving mountains with thick arms that could crush steel. But today, Teo had one more type of recruit. There was a human. Ji-won was different from all the others in the room. She had smooth brown skin, black hair tied back in a simple way, and she stood with her arms crossed, looking relaxed and calm. While the other recruits were nervous and jumping at every small sound, Ji-won looked like she was waiting for a bus instead of about to learn how to survive on the most dangerous moon in the galaxy. Galactic Prime was where they were all going. It was a frozen death trap, a moon where the temperature dropped to minus 150 degrees Celsius. Windstorms there could kill you in minutes. The ice was so hard and sharp that it could cut through normal clothes. Nothing grew there. No animals lived there except for a few creatures that made other monsters seem friendly. Teo had prepared the best equipment in the galaxy for these students. He walked over to a large table covered with survival gear. Each piece was made with the most advanced technology that the Coalition could buy. The thermal suits alone cost more than a small ship. They had special heating fibers that used only a tiny amount of power, but could keep someone warm even in the coldest places. The suits had different layers, each one engineered at the very smallest level to trap heat. "Listen to me," Teo said, his voice deep and serious. All the students stopped and turned to look at him. "Every piece of equipment you see here is designed to keep you alive. I have tested every single item myself. I have taken them to places so cold that the metal becomes brittle like glass. I have used them in storms so strong that they could push a rock across the ground." He picked up a breathing mask and held it up for everyone to see. "This device will help you breathe in the thin, cold air of Galactic Prime. The air there is so cold that it can freeze your lungs. This mask warms the air before you breathe it in. Without this, you will die in 3 minutes. Just 3 minutes." Teo's antennae twitched with worry. He set down the mask and picked up a power unit. "This gives energy to your suit. If this fails, you have maybe 1 hour before your body temperature starts to drop. 1 hour. After that, the cold will be too strong, and you will become slow and confused. After 2 hours, your heart will stop." He looked around at all the nervous faces. Even the tough-looking Stoneborn seemed worried now. Good. Teo believed that a little fear was a good thing. Fear kept people careful. But then he noticed something. Ji-won was not paying full attention. She was looking at the equipment, yes, but her face showed no worry at all. She was almost bored. Her eyes moved from one item to another without the fear that Teo expected to see. This made Teo angry. "You," he said, pointing one long finger at Ji-won. "Human. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Ji-won looked up and met his eyes. Her face was calm. "Yes, Commander. I understand." "Do you?" Teo asked, walking closer to her. "Because you do not look like someone who understands that you could die on Galactic Prime. You do not look like someone who understands that one small mistake will mean the end of your life." "I understand," Ji-won said again. But there was something in her voice, something that suggested she knew something that Tae-oh did not. If you understood, Tae-oh said, his voice getting harder, you would look afraid. You would look serious. Instead, you look like you are waiting for something boring to finish. The other recruits shifted nervously. Nobody ever talked back to Tae-oh like this. But Ji-won did not look upset. She just stood there thinking about something. Commander Tae-oh, Ji-won said, I have a question. Tae-oh's antennae stood up straight. What question? Before all this technology, Ji-won said, pointing at all the equipment on the table, what was the coldest temperature that humans had survived? Without all this gear, what is the coldest we know about? The question caught everyone by surprise. Tae-oh wanted to say that this was not important, that the question was not smart, but something made him answer it anyway. I do not know the exact answer, he said slowly, but I have read the studies. Humans in ancient times survived temperatures of negative 80 degrees Celsius, in extreme cases. But that was different. Those humans had what? Ji-won asked. Tell me, Commander, what did they have? Tae-oh's antennae moved back and forth. They had time. They had preparation. They had, perhaps, biological changes from living in such places for many generations. Exactly, Ji-won said, and a small smile appeared on her face. We had time. We had determination. And we had something that your books call biological change, but my people call memory. The memory of our bodies. Tae-oh felt confused. He did not like feeling confused. Confusion was the enemy of good teaching, and good teaching was his greatest skill. What are you saying, human? He asked. Ji-won stood up from where she had been sitting. She was not very tall compared to Tae-oh, but she seemed to stand very straight and strong. I am saying, she said carefully, that before we had all this technology, my people walked across frozen lands that were colder and more dangerous than Glacick's prime. We hunted animals that were bigger than your station. We had children and raised families in caves during the ice ages, and we did it naked except for animal hides and fire. The room went completely quiet. A Canorian made a sound like breaking glass, which meant surprise. An Ignavar made a low humming noise that meant doubt. Even the Stoneborn seemed shocked. They all turned to look at Ji-won. Tae-oh felt his antennae twitch faster and faster. That was long ago, he said. That is not the same as now. Is it not? Ji-won asked. But Commander, I think I can show you something interesting. If you will let me, I think I can show you that survival is not just about the best equipment. I think survival is also about knowing who you are and where you come from. And I think that is a lesson that will surprise you. Tae-oh looked at this small human woman standing in front of him, and he felt something that he had not felt in 20 years of teaching. He felt uncertain about whether he was right about everything. The briefing room was quiet when Ji-won walked in. All the recruits sat in a circle, and Tae-oh stood in the middle with his arms crossed. His antennae were still moving nervously. He was not sure why he had called this special meeting, but something about what the human girl had said made him want to hear more. Thank you all for coming, Ji-won said. She did not have the same formal way of speaking that Tae-oh had. She sounded like someone telling a story to friends. I want to tell you about my people, about how we survived. And I want to tell you the truth, not the soft version that you might find in simple books. Ji-won sat down cross-legged on the floor. This was a strange thing to do. It made her look small. But when she started to speak, her voice seemed to fill the entire room. 300,000 years ago, she began, my ancestors lived on a planet called Earth. It was not like your home worlds. It had seasons. Sometimes it was warm and things grew everywhere. But sometimes cold came. Not just cold. Ice ages. Imagine a time when ice covered almost everything. Imagine walking for weeks and seeing nothing but white and more white. Imagine the cold so strong that your breath froze into ice before it left your mouth. A Canorian made a worried sound. The ice ages came many times, Ji-Wan continued. Each time, the temperature dropped lower and lower. Each time, most creatures died, but humans did not die. We found ways to live. We made fire. We hunted the animals that still lived. We found caves to sleep in. And we did this with almost nothing. We did not have technology like your civilization has. We did not have computers to help us. We did not have space stations. We just had fire and animal hides and the knowledge of our hunters. Ji-Wan stood up and walked slowly around the circle of recruits. I want to tell you about a place called Siberia, she said. It is in the northern part of my planet. Today, even now, it is one of the coldest places on Earth. But 40,000 years ago, it was even colder. The ice was so thick that you could not see the ground underneath. And yet, people lived there. My ancestors lived there. We have found their tools. We have found their remains. We know they were there because we found the places where they lived. And Ignavar made a sound of disbelief. You do not believe me? Ji-Wan smiled a little. Let me tell you what we know. These humans hunted animals called mammoth. These were huge creatures, as big as your shuttle ships. They had long hair and long teeth. Hunting one of these animals meant running through snow and ice, with no warm clothes like you have now. It meant working as a team, with no machines to help. And they did this. Again and again. They killed these animals, and they used every part. The meat for food, the bones for shelters, the skin for clothes. Teo's antennae had stopped moving. He was listening carefully now. My people also lived in caves, Ji-Wan said. They painted pictures on the walls. We have found these pictures. They show animals and hunters and ceremonies. This means they were not just trying to live. They were creating art. They were thinking about beauty and stories and meaning. While living in caves during an ice age, Ji-Wan sat back down in the center of the circle. Her voice became quieter now, more serious. But here is the most important thing I want you to understand. They survived not because they were lucky. They survived because their bodies were built to survive. Over many generations, my ancestors' bodies changed. Our bodies became better at keeping heat inside. Our bodies learned to build extra layers of fat under the skin. Our hearts learned to pump blood more efficiently when it was cold. Our minds learned to think about survival in ways that other species might not think. She pointed to her body. I am standing here now, speaking to you, and my blood carries the memory of those times. My body remembers what it means to be cold. My body remembers how to survive. A stone-born made a deep rumbling sound, like an avalanche. It was a sound of deep thought. And you know what? Ji-Wan said. That memory is still in my body. I can still feel it. If I close my eyes, if I breathe in the right way, if I think about those ancestors, I can feel their strength. I can feel what they knew. Teo stepped forward. You are saying what? Exactly, he asked. That you can, what, travel back in time in your mind? That is not science. No, Ji-Wan said calmly. I am saying that my ancestors' bodies learned certain things, and that learning is still written in my genetics. The way my body responds to cold, the way my heart beats, the way my muscles work when I am freezing. All of this has been shaped by 300,000 years of survival. And I can reach back to that knowledge if I know how. She stood up and looked directly at Teo. In my country on Earth, we have teachers who study this. They teach people how to breathe correctly, how to calm their minds, how to understand what their bodies are really capable of. By doing this, modern humans can reach back to the abilities that our ancestors had. We can turn on survival responses that most modern humans have forgotten about because they do not need them anymore. That is not possible, said one of the Kenorians. That is fantasy. Is it? Jiwan asked. Then I have a proposal for you. The coalition said that one human could join this training group. They said I could try to become qualified for Galactic Prime. I am requesting permission to test something. She looked at Teo. I want to go to Galactic Prime with minimal equipment. I want to use only basic protection and the techniques that my ancestors used. I want to show you that survival is more than just having the best gear. The room exploded with noise. Everyone was talking and arguing. Tayo's antennae were moving so fast they were just a blur. That is suicide, Teo said loudly. Perhaps, Jiwan said, or perhaps it is education. I believe in my ancestors. I believe in what my body is capable of. I believe that humans are not weak creatures who need machines to survive. And I think if I can show this, it will help all of you understand something important about yourselves too. She turned to all the recruits. Each of you comes from a world. Each of you has ancestors who survived things that seem impossible. You are Kenorians who came from crystal caves. You are Ignivarks who came from worlds where the heat could burn flesh. You are Stoneborn who came from places so hard that only rock could survive. You have that in your blood. You have that strength in your body. And maybe it is time to remember that. Teo felt something change inside him. He did not know what it was, but he knew that the world had just shifted somehow, and he was not sure if he was ready for what came next. The coalition leaders met in a private room above the station. They looked at videos of Jiwan's speech over and over. Some of them thought she was brave, some thought she was crazy. But they all agreed on one thing. If she could prove that humans could survive Galactic Prime with minimal technology, it would change everything about how the Galactic Coalition trained its people. In the end, they said yes to Jiwan's request. Teo did not like this decision, but he could not argue with the leaders of the coalition. If the human wanted to die, he would help her do it safely, with a rescue team ready to pull her out at any moment. The shuttle descended toward Galactic Prime, and Jiwan sat alone by the window. She wore only a light thermal undersuit made from woven plant fibers from Earth. She wore hand wraps treated with organic plant resin. She had a respirator to warm the cold air before she breathed it. She had a small communication device so she could call for help. That was all. Teo watched from the command station on the shuttle, his 3 eyes following every instrument reading. The temperature outside was minus 148 degrees Celsius. The wind was blowing at 195 kilometers per hour. The ice on the ground was so hard it could cut steel. This is madness, Teo said to the pilot. She will freeze in 2 hours, maybe less. But the pilot said nothing. He was just following orders. Jiwan stepped out onto the ice. The cold hit her immediately. It felt like her entire body was being stabbed by 1,000 needles. The wind tried to push her over, but she stood firm. She took deep breaths through her respirator, feeling the warm air fill her lungs. Then she closed her eyes. In her mind, she went back 300,000 years. She thought about her ancestors walking across frozen lands. She thought about their strength and their determination. She thought about the fact that they did this every day, and they survived. She began to breathe in a special way. In slowly through her nose, hold for a count of 5, out through her mouth. The breathing warmed her from inside. As she breathed, she started to move. She did not run or move fast. She moved carefully, deliberately, like someone who had done this for her entire life. From the shuttle, Teo watched the instruments connected to Jiwan's suit. Her heart rate was high at first, but it was becoming more normal. Her body temperature was dropping, yes, but very slowly. Her metabolism was increasing, burning fuel to create heat. How is she doing that? The pilot asked. Teo did not answer because he did not know. Hours passed. Ji-won was still moving across the ice. She had found a large piece of clear ice that was in a small valley. Using her hands, which still had feeling even in the cold, she began to break the ice into blocks. It was hard work. Her hands hurt from the cold, but she kept working. At hour 8, Teo expected her to call for help. She did not call. Instead, Ji-won had built a shelter. Using the ice blocks, she had created a small space that was protected from the worst of the wind. She had used her body heat to keep the inside of this space warmer than the outside. It was not comfortable, but it was working. "Bring me up the medical data," Teo said to his science officer, a young Kenorian named Hae-in. "I want to see everything, every reading, every number." Hae-in brought up the data on the screen. What they saw surprised them. Ji-won's body was doing something remarkable. Her muscles were working in a way that created heat without making her tired. It was like her body knew exactly how to survive. It was like her ancestors were teaching her what to do, even after so many years. At hour 12, Ji-won was still alive. At hour 24, she was not just alive. She was active. She was moving around her ice shelter with purpose. She was using her hands to create an entrance that was small enough to keep the heat in but large enough to see out of. The other recruits watched from the shuttle. The Ignivarks, who came from hot planets, were completely amazed. The Kenorians, who needed special heating everywhere they went, could not believe what they were seeing. Even the tough Stoneborn seemed impressed, though they did not say anything. And then something happened that made everything change. Two of the other recruits were out on the ice in their full high-tech suits, doing a survival exercise. One of them, a young Ignivar named Kyung-soo, had the moisture problem. When you breathed inside a sealed suit in extreme cold, the moisture in your breath froze. It became ice on the inside of the suit. This ice blocked the heating system. The heating system stopped working. Kyung-soo's suit started getting colder. The other recruit, a young Kenorian, had a battery problem. Extreme cold made the batteries work slower, and then, all at once, the battery died. The suit stopped working. The Kenorian recruit started to panic. Panic made her heart beat faster, and a faster heartbeat meant she lost body heat faster. Both recruits had to be rescued. They had been out on the ice for only 2 hours, with all their technology, with all their advanced equipment, and they had failed. Ji-won had been out on the ice for 48 hours, with almost nothing, and she was thriving. Teo sat in the command station and did not move for a long time. His antennae had stopped moving. They just hung down from his head, still and quiet. When Teo finally spoke, his voice was very small. "Bring her back," he said. "She has proven her point." On the ice, Ji-won got the message through her communication device. She gathered her things. She looked back at the shelter she had built with her own hands, using the oldest methods that her people had created so long ago. She smiled a little. Then she walked back toward the shuttle. When she stepped inside, she was covered in ice. Her hands were red from the cold. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright and alive, and she was breathing normally. Teo looked at her across the shuttle bay. "You survived," he said. It was not a question. "We survived," Ji-won said. "My ancestors and me, together." And for the first time in 20 years of teaching, Teo realized that he did not know everything about survival. The coalition headquarters was a huge building made of metal and crystal. Teo had been here many times before, but always he came with pride and confidence. Today was different. Today he walked down the long corridors toward a meeting room, and his antennae hung low on his head. They had called him here to explain. The leaders of the Galactic Coalition wanted to know how this was possible. How could a human survive what their best technology had failed to do? It was not just a question. It was a problem. Many people had spent a lot of money on survival equipment. Many companies had built entire businesses around the idea that beings needed the best technology to survive dangerous places. And now a human woman had shown that maybe that was not completely true. The meeting room had windows that showed the entire star system. The leaders sat around a long table. There was a Valorian like Teo, but older and with more authority. There was a Canorian who seemed to glow with an inner light. There was an Ignivar with red skin that seemed to reflect the light strangely. And there were others, beings that Teo did not recognize. "Commander Teo," said the oldest leader, who was also Valorian, "you have been training recruits for 20 years with our equipment and methods. Your record is perfect, no casualties, high success rates, and now we have a problem." "Yes," Teo said quietly. "The human has changed things," the leader continued. "Scientists are analyzing her medical data. They are finding things they cannot explain. Her body was doing things that should not be possible. Her survival methods were not in any manual we have ever created. And now, people are asking questions." Teo's antennae twitched. "What kind of questions?" "Questions about whether our methods are the only way," the Canorian leader said. "Questions about whether we have been wasting resources. Questions about whether we have been making beings dependent on equipment that might not always work." The Ignovar leaned forward. "Tell us, Teo. Is it possible that we have been wrong? That survival is not just about having the best technology?" Teo did not know what to say. His entire career was built on the idea that technology was the answer. His entire understanding of the universe was based on this belief. But he had watched the instruments as G1 survived on Glacick's Prime. He had seen the data. He knew that what the instruments were telling him was true. "I think," Teo said slowly, "that we may have incomplete knowledge." The room was completely quiet. "Incomplete," repeated the oldest leader. "That is one way to describe being wrong, I suppose." Teo felt anger and shame move through him at the same time. He was not used to failure. He was not used to not understanding something. "I believe," he said, "that the human has shown us something important. But I do not think it means our equipment is useless. I think it means we do not understand everything about how beings survive." "Then you will work with the human to understand," the Canorian leader said. It was not a question. It was an order. Later that day, Teo found Jiwan in the rest area of the station. She was sitting by a window looking out at the stars. She turned when Teo came in, and she was not surprised to see him. "I failed," Teo said. He did not sit down. He just stood there, looking at her. "You did not fail," Jiwan said. "You learned something new. That is not failure. That is growth." "I believed that I was right," Teo said. "I believed that technology was the only answer. I believed that beings needed my equipment to survive. I was arrogant." "You were not arrogant," Jiwan said. "You were incomplete, and now you know more." "That is good." Teo sat down slowly like he was very tired. "I want to understand," he said. "How did you know this would work?" "I did not know," Jiwan said. "I believed, and belief is different from knowledge. But I had something you did not have. I had the memory of my ancestors. I had thousands of years of people who survived in the cold with nothing but their bodies and their minds. I had that running through my blood." She turned to look at him more directly. "But here is what I think is important, Commander. I do not think what I did means your equipment is bad. I think it means your equipment is only part of the answer. If we could combine what I can do with what your technology can do, we would have something even better." "What do you mean?" Teo asked. "I mean," Jiwan said, "that I want to help you create a new way of training, a way that teaches beings about their own bodies and their own ancestors, a way that teaches people that they are stronger than they know, a way that uses technology to help them, not to make them dependent." Tao's antennae began to move in small, thoughtful circles. Jiwan continued. Every species has ancestors who survived things that should have been impossible. The Kenorians survived in crystal caves where the pressure would crush soft beings. The Ignovarks survived on planets where the heat could melt metal. The Stoneborn survived in environments so harsh that only rock could endure. That strength is still in your bodies. You just need to remember it. A younger Kenorian named Hai-In came into the room. She had been observing the data from Jiwan's test. She looked from Tai-O to Jiwan, and then she asked a question that would change everything. If humans can do this with almost nothing, Hai-In said, what could other species learn if we understood our own evolutionary adaptations? What if we could teach all species to reach back to their own ancestral knowledge? Teo felt something shift in his mind. It was like a door opening that he had not known existed. That, he said slowly, is a very good question. Jiwan smiled. That is the question that will change the Galactic Coalition. Over the next few hours, Taiyo and Jiwan talked about possibilities. They talked about combining science and tradition. They talked about creating new training methods that respected both technology and biology. They talked about a future where all beings understood that survival came not just from what they carried with them, but from what they carried inside themselves. By the time the conversation ended, Taiyo's antennae were moving with excitement instead of worry. I want to learn from you, Taiyo said. And I want to learn from you, Jiwan replied. We can teach each other. That night, Taiyo sat in his quarters and looked out at the stars. He thought about 20 years of teaching the same way, with the same methods, never questioning whether he was right. He thought about a small human woman who had shown him that there was always more to learn, and he smiled. For the first time in days, Taiyo smiled. The new training program took shape slowly. Taiyo worked with Jiwan every day. He also brought in a human named Kyung-Soo, a man who was a doctor and understood how the body worked. Together, the three of them created something completely new. The equipment bay was transformed. It still had all the advanced technology, but now there were also meditation cushions, breathing mats, and teaching boards with diagrams showing how bodies responded to cold and heat and pressure. The transformation made some of the old coalition officials uncomfortable, but the leaders allowed it to continue. The first new training class had recruits from many different species. There were 20 Kenorians, 15 Ignovarks, and 10 Stoneborn. There were also 3 more humans besides Jiwan. The mix of species made the training room look like a celebration of the galaxy itself. Taiyo stood in front of the class, but he was different now. He moved with less confidence and more openness. His antennae moved in curious, questioning ways instead of rigid, commanding ways. For 20 years, Taiyo said, I taught survival using only technology. Today we begin something different. Today we learn survival using both technology and knowledge. We learn survival using both the future and the past. Jiwan stood beside him, and she took over the lesson. I want to start with the Kenorians, Jiwan said, looking at the crystal beings. Your ancestors came from planets where pressure from the rocks and minerals was extreme. The pressure inside the Earth was so strong that it could break most materials. But your bodies learned to survive. Your crystalline structure learned to be flexible while still being strong. You can bend without breaking. One of the Kenorians, a young female named Minseo, raised her hand. Are you saying we can use that now? That we can bend without breaking even in extreme conditions? Yes, Jiwan said. But you need to remember how to do it. Your body knows, but your mind has forgotten. Let me teach you. Jiwan showed the Kenorians a breathing technique that was different from what the Ignovarks or Stoneborn would learn. For Kenorians, the breathing was fast and rhythmic, like a crystalline vibration. When they practiced this breathing, something remarkable happened. Their bodies became more flexible. They could take hits that would normally break them. They could survive in crushing pressure that would destroy other beings. Then G1 worked with the Ignovarks. Your ancestors lived on planets where the heat was like nothing you can imagine now, G1 told the red-skinned beings. The sun beat down on the Earth so hard that rocks melted. Your bodies learned to survive by moving the heat out instead of keeping it in. You learned to use sweat and wind to cool yourselves. You learned to think in ways that did not overheat your brains. The Ignovarks listened carefully as G1 taught them about controlled cooling. She taught them how to relax their muscles to create less internal heat. She taught them how to breathe in ways that moved hot air out of their bodies. And she taught them how to use their dark hair, which they thought was just appearance, as an insulation and cooling system. A young Ignovar named Day-Ri tried the techniques. He sat in a hot room that was designed to be like the surface of his home planet. The heat was so intense that the normal survival suit would have overheated within minutes. But Day-Ri, using the ancestral techniques that G1 had taught him, managed to stay calm and stable. His body responded the way his ancestors' bodies had responded. Finally, G1 worked with the Stoneborn. "You are made of rock and stone," she said to the huge beings. "Your bodies are dense and heavy. That means something important. It means you can store heat for much longer than other species. You can use your density as protection. Your ancestors survived in environments so harsh that softer beings would have been crushed instantly. What your ancestors learned was how to use their weight and strength not to fight nature, but to work with it." G1 taught the Stoneborn a different kind of breathing and meditation. It was slower, deeper, more connected to the Earth itself. When they practiced this, their bodies seemed to become even more solid, more connected to the ground beneath them. They used less energy because they were not fighting against their own nature. They were working with it. After 3 weeks of training, Kyung-Soo brought the new recruits to a testing ground. The location was harsh in multiple different ways. One part was extremely cold, like Glacick's Prime. Another part was extremely hot, like the surface of an Ignovar planet. A third part had crushing pressure that tested the strength of all bodies. Teo watched from the control station as the recruits were released into these test zones. Something important was happening. The Kenorians who had learned the ancestral breathing techniques survived the pressure chamber twice as long as recruits trained the old way. The Ignovarks who had learned the cooling techniques managed the heat chamber with barely any sweat or stress in their bodies. The Stoneborn recruits, using their deep meditation and connection to the Earth, survived the cold chamber longer than any being had managed before. But the most important thing was not the survival times. The most important thing was how the recruits felt about themselves. They were not scared anymore. They understood now that they were not weak. They understood that they carried within themselves the strength of thousands of generations of ancestors. Minseo, the young Kenorian, came out of the pressure chamber and started to glow with light. She was glowing because she was so happy. "I did not know I could do that," she said. "I did not know I was that strong." Day-Ri, the Ignovar, smiled in a way that made his whole red face shine. "I felt like my ancestors were with me in there," he said. "I felt their knowledge helping me survive." Teo made the announcement that would change the Galactic Coalition forever. "The new training program is approved," he said. "From this point forward, all recruits will learn both the technology of survival and the ancestral knowledge of survival. Both are important. Both are necessary." Over the next weeks, the program spread to other training stations around the galaxy. Ji-Wan became a teacher in the Coalition. Kyung-Soo continued to explain the science behind why these ancient techniques worked in the modern world. And Tai-O, the instructor who had spent 20 years believing that technology was everything, became the biggest supporter of bringing ancestral knowledge back to life. But more than that, Tai-O learned something about himself. He learned that being wrong was not a failure. Being wrong meant you had learned something new. Being wrong meant you could become better. His antennae were happier now. They moved with curiosity instead of rigidity. And when he looked at the new recruits learning and growing, he felt something that he had not felt before. He felt hopeful about the future.